Okay, awesome. Looks like we're all set. And Katie, if you'd like to share the PowerPoint, then we can get everyone set up with the visuals too. Perfect. So logistics, accessibility is super important, as Annika said. Also, I'm Naya. My pronouns are she and they. I am a member of BYP 100 DC. And accessibility is core. So we have closed captioning. And Katie, if you'll go to the next slide so that people can read both languages too. Yes, thank you. So we have closed captioning available, and there's live Spanish interpretation. Hoy tenemos interpretación en español también. And so for closed captioning, Patty is our lovely closed captioner. Thank you for being with us. You can turn this on. You'll get a little notification at the bottom of your Zoom that closed captioning is available. You can click that to turn that on. And then for Spanish interpretation, Sarah, I don't know, Sarah, if you want to wave. Sarah is our Spanish interpreter. Yes, okay. So to choose your language, and this is actually something we need everyone to do. So if you're listening in English, or if you would like to listen in Spanish, if you can go to the bottom of your Zoom and click the interpretation button that looks like a globe, and then just select your language, that would be great. Yeah. For our interpreter, to help them out, we want to speak slowly and to speak one at a time. So we will do that as facilitators, and also for the interactive moments where some participants will speak, we'll just offer that reminder to speak slowly and to speak one at a time, and to choose your language. I'll pass it to Aiden.
Hey y'all, thank you again so much for being here today. My name is Aiden. I use she, her pronouns. On a logistical note, in terms of questions, our chat moderator is, let's go back to the other slide real quick. Our chat moderator for today is the amazing Jazz B. Jazz B, I don't know if you want to take a second to introduce yourself or would prefer to just wave. So I'll give you the time to do that if you'd like.
Yes, welcome. So excited to have you all here today. Jazz B, I use they, them pronouns, and DC on Piscataway territory. Thanks, y'all.
God bless. So if you have any questions throughout the workshop, you can search their name, Jazz B, and then chat mod in parentheses to shoot them a direct message or ask something in the chat. Something to note is that we are recording this currently. If that is something that you do not consent to, be sure to direct message Jazz B, or if not, alternatively, you can just turn off your camera. Another note in terms of safety, if we could switch to the next slide, because we will be discussing harm and violence today, we recognize that some folks might need some time to take care of themselves if that content might be overwhelming. And we will provide content warnings for folks when those themes appear, but we've created a separate Zoom link for folks to hop on to at any point during this conversation if they feel like they need to. Allison Young, who is another BYP 100 member. Allison, not sure. Oh, I see you're in the chat. Allison, if you'd like to introduce yourself for a second.
Hi, yes. Allison Young, they, them pronouns. I'm also with the BYP 100 chapter, and yeah, just affirming what Aiden already said. I'm here to hold space for any emotions, feelings that may arise during this conversation.
Yes, and thank you so much for that, Allison. So they will be hosting that Zoom if you need a break, time to breathe, someone to talk to, and of course, when you're done, you can hop back onto this call at any point. So we have the link to that separate Zoom on the slide right now, but if you, but later on in the teach-in, as we get into some of the more substantive content, the link will be at the bottom of each slide for people to refer to. But also feel free to ask Jasby and they can drop the link in the chat.
Sweet. So we're gonna start off by introducing BYP 100. So I'm gonna introduce myself. My name is Naomi. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a member. Can we go back to the last slide? Thank you. Other last. Back last. The one before. Thank you. Sorry, we're struggling through this together. We're all in different places, so we appreciate your patience with us. Like I was saying, my name is Naomi. I use they, them pronouns. I'm also a member of the BYP 100 chapter in DC, and I want to make sure that all BYP 100 folks got a chance to introduce ourselves. I know Aiden already introduced herself, Naya already introduced herself, Annika already introduced themselves, and we have one more person, which is Hanos. So maybe you can take a second to introduce yourself as well, Hanos.
Hey y'all, my name is Hanos, he, him pronouns, and I'm excited to be here with y'all. Be speaking shortly, but thank you for that, Naomi.
Yeah. So BYP 100, Black Youth Project 100, is a national member-based organization of Black 18 to 35-year-old activists and organizers dedicated to creating justice and freedom for all Black people. We do this through building a network focused on transformative leadership development, direct action organizing, advocacy, and political education using a Black queer feminist lens. What is a Black queer feminist lens, you ask? Let's go to the next slide. So I think Annika is going to share with us a little bit about the Black queer feminist lens, if you feel ready.
I'm totally unmuted. I'm so sorry. I also asked, what is a Black queer feminist lens, you ask? So in the spirit of the Combahee River Collective, which identified the simultaneous oppressions experienced by Black women, we recognize that as the BYP 100, we recognize that overlapping marginalized identities of Black, queer, trans, non-binary, disabled, femme, undocumented, and poor folks must be centered in our work, and that if we are materially improving the lives of those folks and building their power, that we are creating liberation for all people. And so these perspectives are often left out of mainstream narratives, and therefore solutions for issues facing these communities don't get addressed. So the reason that we organize through a Black queer feminist lens is that it allows us to uplift these perspectives, and we get to organize this way because it's the only way that we can ensure that everyone is free, because none of us are free if anyone is left behind. And I'll toss it over to Katie to talk about current movements.
Hey everyone, I'm actually gonna stop sharing my screen for just a second and make Naya a co-host. Shout out to our closed caption person. I've never seen this happen before, and I just feel like technology is so cool. Okay, Naya, you should have it. Great. Beautiful, beautiful. And I want to, sorry, thanks for bearing with us. Yeah, nice. So if you can keep letting people into the call, that would be excellent.
Yep, got you.
Thanks, Pam. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again, and then we'll go back to my bit. Cool. So my name is Katie Pettit. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the founder and director of Current Movements. current movements, connects grassroots movements and organizations through art, film, and technology. And through events and films highlighting the work of grassroots movement, we engage audiences on the issues of today with the goal of inspiring new and experienced organizers alike to dream big and take action. And I want to welcome you to this event and thank you for being here. I also want to give a big thanks to the brilliant people of Black Youth Project 100 DC for partnering with us to share this really important teach-in on abolition. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. My early organizing days started with Black Lives Matter DC and Movement for Black Lives DC. And so Black liberation is really important to me. And I actually just recently stepped back after 3 years of organizing to focus on current movements with the hopes that we can connect more of our movements together and engage folks like you in ways to get involved and just kind of pull back the curtain on organizing so you can see the power and the beauty of organizing. So I'm going to drop some more information about current movements into the chat, but I just really appreciate all of you for being here. Thanks so much.
Hey y'all, so it's me again, Hanos, he, him pronouns. The flow of this, and we want to be mindful of folks' time. We were going through our introduction at this moment. We then want to transition into a time where we define abolition, then speak to some frequently asked questions, comments, and concerns regarding abolition. We're going to take a quick break right after that. And then we want to really transition into what we think is what I'm particularly very excited about, which is rooting abolition in both our body and our community, finding interactive. Oops. Yeah, so finding ways to be rooted in that in interactive exercises and seeing how what the concept and practice of abolition feels both for us and in both idea and embodiment. Then we'll transition into a closing, and well, thank you for being here with us today.
All right. Hey everyone, Naya, she, and they pronouns. And we just want to make sure that we are intentional about the space that we are sharing today. And so we've got some group agreements that I'll just name aloud for us. We want to use I statements in honoring everyone's individual perspectives that might be different from our own. We are going to think about impact over intention. And so we hope that everyone is showing up with good intentions, with life-affirming intentions and expansive intentions to take care. And we recognize that we have tangible impacts on each other that matter regardless of what our intention is. And so we will hold both of those and ensure that we're considering the deep impact of what we do. And that we can also respond to impact regardless of what our intention is as a way of taking care of each other as well. Make space, take space. So there's a lot of people on the Zoom, which is brilliant. We are so excited you are here. And so we will practice this as facilitators and also encourage everyone to practice this as we participate with each other. But to both make space and to take space. So to build community in that way, to think, you know, have I shared yet? Nope. Do I have something to share? Yeah, let me share it. And also making sure that other people have space to share as well. A good way to kind of like walk yourself through that is, why am I talking? Wait, but just thinking about, okay, what do I want to share? Where does this fit in? And then show up as you think is best. Not everything we start, we will finish, especially not in this hour and a half with you all. But I think that is beautiful. Abolition is ongoing. It is a praxis, and it is something that we are attempting to live. And so we hope to take an important dive with you today, but there will definitely be more work to do, more to learn, and more to follow up with each other on in community. Remember your positionality. We each come from our own distinct backgrounds, experiences, and we show up with everything that we are, or at least what you want to bring today. And so you know where you stand, and just keep that in mind as we interact with other people, and keeping in mind that there is a variety of positions in the Zoom that we're sharing together. And then lastly, we encourage everyone to take care of yourself. That is part of what we're talking about. That is what we're talking about, is taking care of ourselves and each other. And so do what you need. We do have the healing Zoom. If you'd like to take a moment and step out at any time, the link is in the bottom left of the slide. There also will always be reminders in the chat. Yeah, to just do absolutely what you need. I'll pass it to Aiden.
Yes, thank you so much, Naya. This is Aiden, she, her. With that, we'd also like to take note of some facilitator agreements that we commit to. The first is speaking from our own experiences using I statements. Secondly, pausing for questions and comments frequently. We want this to be as interactive of a teach-in as possible, and that means creating space for dialogue as well. Fourth, we commit to letting us, each other, be held accountable to those group agreements that we mentioned, and also being honest about our own limitations. As much as we are facilitating this conversation, we ourselves have the things that we're struggling with and the things that we're dealing with. So it's important to be honest about that. And lastly, we commit to taking a break because we will need it. That being said, I will pass it to Annika to talk about our objectives for the day.
Yes, so I touched on this, thank you so much, Aiden. I touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but our goals here today are threefold. We are hoping everybody's going to be able to walk away with a basic definition of abolition. And by definition, I don't necessarily mean like, you know, noun, 3 syllables, It doesn't necessarily mean a precise definition that you can rattle off, but we hope that you'll leave with a better understanding of what we've been conditioned to believe, what we've been conditioned to believe about harm and crime, quote unquote, and where those feelings come from, and how to think about why and how we had our minds colonized in that way. And so we just want to make sure that everyone has access to some ways of thinking that allow us to think critically about the systems we live under that prevent abolition right now. Second, we're really hoping that folks will be able to think more about applying an abolitionist framework in their daily lives. This is not about the rules and regulations of abolition. There aren't really rules and regulations of abolition. That's kind of the point. Today is also not a transformative justice workshop. It is a space where we will center the body as a source of knowledge and as a guide towards building an abolitionist practice. We also hope that you'll leave excited and empowered and engaged to learn more and to engage your community, folks in your community about abolition. So this is not a moment, it's a movement, and movements require organizing. And with that energy, we'll hope you'll engage with or support organizations and formations in your communities that made this kind of moment possible, so that we can, keep every iteration of uprising and every iteration of, building power amongst all of our communities, stronger and more organized and more powerful in the interest of liberation for our folks. So I will pass it off to Naomi to root us in.
Hey again. So Naomi, they, them pronouns. As we move to the next slide, we're going to take a moment to root ourselves in place and physicality, even though we're connecting to each other virtually. And part of doing that, and part of our politics as abolitionists, is that we know that it's important to acknowledge that wherever we may be, especially if folks are in the US or Canada, so-called US or Canada, that as we're gathering, we're occupying unceded Indigenous land. So we offer this land acknowledgement because we know that as Black people, our histories of removal, displacement, and exploitation are also bound up in the histories of violence done to Indigenous people on this land. and that harm and violence done to Indigenous people by white colonizers in order to clear land was the same violence that was done to Black people so that they could be exploited on this land. So the first question that we're going to ask as we do this land acknowledgement is, where are we? And that's going to be on our next slide. As facilitators, as I mentioned before, we're not actually all in the same place, even though we could go back. Yeah. Oh, they're back. Thank you. Thanks. So we're not actually all in the same place. I have been living in DC, but right now I'm at home in New York City, which is on Lenape and Canarsie lands and the DC chapter. So folks who are living in DC proper or in Maryland and Virginia are on Piscataway and Nacotchunk lands. And we want to take a moment for you all to go to this website, nativeland.ca, which Jazz B, our wonderful chat mod, just put in the chat, to take a look and see where you are. And I want to know that this is not a be-all end-all map. It's reflective of one moment in time, but also acknowledging that our knowledge of Indigenous land stewardship in history is complicated by colonialism and complicated by the violence of white supremacy. So this is an approximation, but important to do nonetheless. So folks can take a minute right now to go to that website and then can drop back in the chat and post to everyone what is the name of, or what are the names of the Indigenous people who have traditionally stewarded the land that you are on right now. So you can take 2 minutes to do that. Or if you already know the name, you can drop that as well. We have someone who is on Osage land, someone who's also on Nacotchunk and Piscataway land, someone who's on Lenape land, Massachusetts land, someone who is on Manahoac land, someone who's on Ohlone land, lots of folks who are on Piscataway land, someone who's on Tongva land, going really fast and I love it, more Piscataway, Sioux land, Lenape land, Kumeyaay land, Nipmunk land, Sioux land, Peoria, Potawatomi, Piscataway. Okay, so there's a lot. Keep dropping them in. But that's just a way to get a sense for where we're all at. And then let's go to the next slide. And we're going to talk a little bit about Indigenous life in both past, present, and future tense. So I learned at a recent song training, stands for Southerners on New Ground, which is a badass organization of folks that believe in liberation for all queer people, that a fuller land acknowledgement offers not just information about Indigenous people in history, but also frames Indigenous life in the present and the future. So we're going to do that as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Piscataway people, because that's where the DC chapter of BYP 100 is based. So past tense, prior to European colonization, Piscataway people farmed the land that they stewarded. European settlers began making incursions in the early 1600s, and within 40 years of that initial incursion, a significant portion of the Piscataway people had either been removed or migrated to what is now Northern Virginia or Pennsylvania. Turning to the present, 8 years ago, the Piscataway Conoy tribe received recognition from the state of Maryland after 2 centuries of having not been acknowledged. We know that state recognition won't grant liberation to oppressed and marginalized people, but want to share this because we know it was an achievement that was sought after by the Piscataway Conoy tribe. And then as we think about the future of Indigenous life on this land, I want to uplift something that happened a couple days ago. As many of you know or may have seen, a group of Indigenous activists staged an action at the President's 4th of July event at Mount Rushmore. Mount Rushmore is a monument to colonialism and white supremacy that was carved into a sacred site for the Lakota Sioux of the Black Hills, known to the Lakota Sioux as Six Grandfathers. The action blocked the road to the event and articulated a vision for future Indigenous sovereignty over that land. And so with that kind of vision in mind, I want to quote Zoe Samudzi, who's a Black anarchist, who says that abolition in its fullest expression must orient toward the restoration of Indigenous sovereignty. So that's kind of why we offer the land acknowledgement, both to like get us down in place and as part of our abolitionist politic. So I'm going to pass it along to Haynos.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Naomi. And I'm glad that you all are here with us to emphasize and reiterate on the point of this community and this collaborative. Our approach to defining abolition today will be to do this together. So I believe we have a volunteer to read off the first definition, working definition we have of abolition. So we can transition to the next slide, and whomever that volunteer is, if you could unmute yourself and read, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Haynos. We actually do not have a volunteer at this moment, facilitating transparency. I was trying to answer some chat questions. But if we could get someone to support on that, if you could just pop your name in the chat real quick to support and reading out a definition out loud, that would be great. And we'll just take the first person who pops in the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, so if we could just transition to the next slide, that'd be great. And someone could read it.
Jade, no pronouns. Thank you so much.
Okay. Critical resistance. Prison industrial complex abolition is a political vision with the goal of eliminating imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment.
Thank you so much for having. Yeah, thank you so much. Can we shift to the next slide? So we defined the prison and the abolition within a specific framework, which is the prison industrial complex. One of the things that serves the prison industrial complex, as we know, is the police. Prior to this, we asked you all, and I think around 50 of you gave answers around what the role of police has served thus far in your life. The question was, have you ever called the police? And if so, for what? I'll read aloud some of the answers that you all gave, which is a car accident, mental health check, break-ins, domestic violence, multiple car accidents, and I'm going to especially highlight, I've never called the police. I think what we want to highlight in this moment is that the role of police, by definition, is in service to the state. And the state, by definition, I hope this doesn't stop our Facebook Live, but the reason we all came here today is to say together, fuck the fourth. The reason why we're saying fuck the fourth is because we acknowledge that this land, this country, from its foundation, was built on stolen land, built upon and grown by stolen peoples, and from its inception was built upon the theft and exploitation of people. So therefore, folks whose responsibility is to uphold that system and maintain it, we understand don't actually serve or play a role for us. That said, some of these things that we're talking about are things that we may need to address, and not going to erase that. And I'm not going to minimize the conversations around how we can support one another and our society and our community. We just must acknowledge that the police do not serve that role. Their role is to protect the capital and to be in service of capitalists, which I am not. And I think no one on this call is exploiting the labor of the masses. So if we can transition to the next slide, our next volunteer can read this next definition.
Erin, if you are still available to read, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is from Fred Moten and Stefano Harney. Not so much the abolition of prisons, but the abolition of a society that could have prisons, that could have slavery, that could have the wage, and therefore not abolition as the elimination of anything, but abolition as the founding of a new society.
Bars, Aaron, on behalf of Fred Moten and Stefano Harney. Thank you. If we can transition to the next slide. Thank you. That is exactly what we're working for. We understand that the current systems that we have do not work in service of us. As a matter of fact, they work in exploitation of us. They work in response to potential harms that are being created, not to ignore that those things occur, but that they only work to reinforce the system of exploitation and oppression that this very country was built upon. So when we say, fuck the fourth, free the people, we mean fuck the foundations of this country, fuck the foundations that was built upon this, that even allowed for these things to occur. And for us to dream of abolition, it is not just confined to the prison industrial complex. It also must address what led to the conditions of the prison industrial complex. What led to the conditions by which we allowed a system and society to exploit us as its citizens and the people within it. By being able to address that, we can then start thinking collaboratively together on what that new future can look like. So some questions I would like for us to think through, and please feel free to drop some answers in the chat, is what would this freedom that this country is allegedly built upon actually feel like for you? What makes you feel safe? What would that safety look like? And what would it feel and look like to have access to the care that you need? So I'll take a couple seconds. Please feel free to respond in the chat. I can read some of these out aloud. Okay, abolishing the gender binary. We love it. And of course, only if you all feel free. But I'm very appreciative that you mentioned that, AJ, because one of the things that allows us to have these systems of exploitation is things like the gender binary. The way we traumatize and have violence towards other people is, as Dante alluded to, capitalism, patriarchy, and racism. We cannot abolish the prison industrial complex. We don't abolish the very systems and functions that of a power and society that allowed us to get to a place and point where we have the execution of the oppressive systems. We're loving some of these answers. Self-sovereignty of indigenous peoples across the world, safe housing, excellent education, and Medicare for all. My nose being respected. Again, to get to that point, one of the key concepts is understanding what makes oftentimes folks, the concept of masculinity, not receive or understand a no. And the patriarchy at the undercurrent of that teaches and conditions men to believe that we have this deserving. We have the right to a yes. And without constructing or deconstructing and abolishing that, we cannot attempt to address the violent systems that we currently live within. I'm loving some of these answers, and I hope folks are taking the time to read through them. But for the sake of time, we can keep going to the next slide. And if our next volunteer can read, that would be great.
Yes, Aziza and Jordan. Thank you so much.
Sorry about that, still muted. Working definition of critical resistance. Embracing abolition is imagining alternatives and building models that represent how we want to live in the future. Abolition is both a practical organizing tool and a long-term goal.
Exactly. So some of the things that you are speaking to in the chat, and we can move to the next slide, some of the things that we're speaking to in the chat, and some of the ways that we would like to shift and push away from requires our imagination. Abolition isn't just the abolishing of our current systems. It requires implicitly the creation and imagination. That imagination cannot exist in the independent. There is no authority or experts except those of us in community with one another. The reason why that's so important to highlight is that if we are not working together to create this abolition, our cooperative abolitionist framework, then we're just merely recreating some of the very systems that created the authority and oppression that we currently have. To have the world and system that we hope to live in, it has to be one rooted in compassion, care, and collaboration. I give an example here of transformative justice, which exists within the abolitionist framework, and it's relatively popular and one that we speak to now. Transformative justice seeks to respond to violence without creating more violence or engaging in harm reduction to lessen the violence. The focus is on the harm, not necessarily the individuals involved. What we mean by that is that when harm is created, we understand that there are conditions by which that we came to the place where harm is created. We want to address the very underlying systems that allow for that harm to be created. So as a community, as individuals within the creation of the harm, we need to address the very harm that has been created and create systems so that that harm is both addressed and we start creating collaborative ways to prevent that harm from continuing or being perpetuated. So I just want to highlight and give one example of transformative justice. And again, the ways that we work through and the things that we do as a community and the things that we do collaboratively are all steps towards our imagined abolitionist future. Is there a perfect answer? No. Is there one that is the ideal way to go about things? No. Should we be working through struggling and critiquing one another so that we achieve the world that we aim to achieve, our combined imagined future? Absolutely. And I think we can transition now to a couple of ways that folks are attempting to do that both in this nation and here in DC. And I'll kick it over to Naya. Thank you.
Thank you, Janos. Nothing but truth. And thank you all for also participating in the chat. People are on it. And just as people are on it in this Zoom today, organizers are on it doing the very imagining, doing the very creating that Janos just grounded us so beautifully in. And so I just want to highlight two campaigns that are live and popping right now and critically important to creating this future for us. So the first is 8 to Abolition. Abolitionist organizers came together to create this campaign in response to Campaign Zero's 8 Can't Wait campaign, which is a set of irresponsible and inadequate reforms that claim to reduce police violence by 72%. We know simply that that is not enough, and the organizers who created 8 to Abolition know deeply that that is not enough. What we are living right now is reform. What we have seen for decades is reforms, and we are still living in the very realities that we all know too well to be true. Reform only improves police's violence against people. And so what is clear about these demands is the creation, is what we need. And the grounding that abolition can't wait. I'm going to name every single one of them aloud. The first demand in the 8 to Abolition campaign is to defund the police, and we'll talk about that some more as well. The second is to demilitarize communities. The third is to remove police from schools. The fourth, free people from jails and prisons. The fifth, repeal laws that criminalize survival. The sixth, invest in community self-governance. 7th, provide safe housing for everyone. And the 8th, invest in care, not cops. And so these demands are clear and they are full of imagination. So I want to highlight that clarity and grounding for us here, that this is a tangible, ongoing step right now to get us the world we want and need, deserve, and can start creating right now. And what I see as a thread throughout these demands is the centering of communities, the centering of people who are thinking about meeting need. I did not create the 8 to Abolition campaign. So when I say we, I'm thinking about people as hopefully practitioners of abolition as we grow in creating the world, but the worlds that we can start creating right now and the worlds that center our communities. And we especially today want to shout out our very own BYP 100 DC member, Nena, who did help create these demands and is in this Zoom right now. The shit is lit. Thank you. Everyone go check this out. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll tell you about a second campaign that's running right now too. Okay, so locally in DC and nationally, campaigns to defund the police are on and popping right now. Because we know that abolition is not just destruction, it is the creation of the worlds that we need, want, and deserve. And so locally in DC, we are clear about that demand. The Defund MPD campaign is run by a coalition of organizers and organizations and people in DC, especially spearheaded by Black Lives Matter DC, BYP 100 DC, Stop Police Terror Project, and Black Swan Academy, and then a coalition of many, many, many orgs holding this work down. And this image, many of you have probably seen, is of the recreation of the mural that Muriel Bowser had painted downtown, the Black Lives Matter mural. But what organizers knew is that painting letters on streets do not give us tangible resources, do not give us change in communities, do not meet people's needs from an abolitionist framework. And so touting this national glorious art piece, which we do appreciate using art throughout the movement, however, does not keep us safe. And so, thank you. Tamara in the chat said, performance art is nice, is nice, but not enough, honestly. And so the part of the mural you're seeing right now is what organizers corrected. We're clear locally that Black Lives Matter means defund the police, because defunding the police does keep us safe. And so Defund MPD campaign has 3 demands. The first is to slash that budget, defund the Metropolitan Police Department, to invest in community safety, to invest in Black communities, and to actually meet the needs of communities, to give people the resources that they deserve just for the sake of being people, and to specifically have police-free schools. Naomi, $0, $0. We are slashing the budget. And so time and time again, you see organizers and the people doing the government's job again. Whoever is unmuted, if you'll take a sec to mute, please. And locally in DC, that campaign is ongoing and urgent, and part of this national uprising here, and also one that I will say extends beyond the borders of this colonized land as well. Yes, so those are 2 tangible, like ongoing current examples of how people are imagining and ways that we can create right now as we move along the path that Janos grounded us in. I'll pass it on.
Thanks so much, Naya. Yes, get into this work. Apologies for the abrupt slide, but we are about to be talking about some frequently asked questions about abolition that are sometimes trickier to answer, and that often serve as a barrier to understanding and deeper conversation with folks who are newer to abolition or who don't yet understand it. But some of those questions often involve sexual violence and physical violence. So this is a content warning, so that if anyone needs to take a breath, Allison, our care bear, is here for you. And we also have the breakout Zoom that you can join until the conversation is over if you need. So, you know, please take care of yourself as you need to. That's a really important part of our politics too. So with that, we'll jump into the abolition frequently asked questions. So the top 3 questions we usually get when we start to get into the weeds of abolition are: 1, what about the murderers and the rapists? 2, you really would just want to open up all the jails tomorrow? That's usually how they say it. And then the third question is, what do we do with the people who don't want to be a part of a process? And by process, I mean a community accountability process or a transformative justice process, something like that. And so I will go through each of these with a few points that might be helpful in your conversations with people as you are, building abolitionist praxis in your communities. So next slide. The first question, what about the murderers and the rapists? There are a few points that we can use to prevent or to, decrease the likelihood of being derailed when we're talking about abolition when this comes up. So the first point is that prisons and police produce extreme sexual harm and violence. We saw with Daniel Holtzclaw's conviction in 2015, the cop, if folks remember, that was the cop who raped a number of Black women who, he had taken into custody for nefarious reasons. And we also know from a number of folks that we work with that especially Black women and especially sex workers are often subjected to sexual violence at the hands of the police. Further, the system that we currently have rarely, if ever, holds cops accountable for sexual violence. We also know that police murder people and prisons kill people. So when we're talking about murderers, it's always, what about the murderers, not what about the police and the prisons that kill people, right? I heard that people are doing that on Twitter, so I thought I'd try it too. So police kill people with guns, they kill people with tasers, they put their knees on our necks, and they kill our folks. Prisons kill people by disappearing them, through poor conditions. Sometimes it's longer term murder, which includes putting folks in poor conditions and providing improper care, feeding them food that is, feeding folks food that is not worthy for human consumption. And the take home point here is that just because the police and the prisons are, responsible for the violence and it's state sanctioned violent harm, that does not mean that police and prisons are actually reducing violent harm, right? And then for the second point, I want to make one quick note before I go on to make a distinction between harm and crime. So I'm going to use the word harm because what we're talking about when we're talking about abolition is we don't want people to be harmed. We want to do everything that we can to prevent harm. But crime is a really different thing. When we talk about harm, we're talking about actions that cause other people pain and suffering, actions that take away from other folks' agency over their bodies or their space, actions that require a lot of support to heal from. Crime, on the other hand, is very different. So when we say crime, we're talking about things that the state has decided are harmful in a very different way. Some crimes involve harm as we've defined it. So like murder is a crime, correct. But many crimes do very little harm or none actually. So things like tax fraud really don't harm anybody. Theft rarely harms folks. Jaywalking is a crime. I'm really not about to go into a community accountability process about jaywalking. So it's really important for us to interrogate what we see as actually harmful to our communities and what the criminal legal system has decided is criminal. So I just wanted to get that point out of the way before we moved on. So the next point is that prisons and police do not stop murder or rape or most violent crime, right? So allegations about violent harm are the lowest reported crimes in every single jurisdiction across the country. About 1% of 911 calls are for alleged serious violent harm, and most of the time, police fail to adequately investigate those harms anyway. So, and in fact, there are a number of notable rapists and murderers around us all the time. One of them is in the White House, a couple are on the Supreme Court, a few of them are heads of business and industry. So the question we ask people who ask this question, what about the murderers and the rapists, is often, well, what should we doing about them then? Because a lot of them are just walking around without ever having been held accountable. And that's sometimes a helpful way to turn the question on its head, to be like, you're concerned about the murderers and the rapists, but the murderers and the rapists are out here. So what do you think we should do? And that's often a way to get into a more generative conversation about what we in this conversation or folks in your community actually do want to see happen when harm occurs. So the third point is that, and I'm sorry, I'm talking through this pretty quickly because I want to protect everybody, or be respectful of everybody's time, but we wanted to make sure to get through some of these points because often we see these sticking points when folks are newer to abolition or excited about it, and then it's a really quick way to end a conversation, so we want to make sure that you're equipped with these. So I promise this is the longest talking at you slide that we have. So the third point is that existing processes do not support survivors' needs or healing, and that is central to ending cycles of harm. Prosecution is about the state. and it is not about the needs and desires of survivors. It just isn't. That is why criminal cases are called like State versus Jones or Commonwealth versus Smith. The state and the Commonwealth is allegedly the one harmed, which is the, you know, the state that you live in is allegedly the one harmed in these cases. And that's because violent crimes are never about holding the accused accountable on behalf of someone who has been harmed, but because the state's only interest is in pursuing criminal cases for its own end. And that makes it, when we think about, you know, sort of like criminal cases in that context, it makes a lot of sense why police are never held accountable or are never charged or rarely ever go to jail for, you know, murdering us with impunity, right? Because it's not actually in the interest of the state to hold police accountable. And with respect to sexual violence, I'm an attorney by day, and I have seen a number of cases where a survivor of sexual violence has asked for the state not to press charges or for an alternative remedy for an accused person because that's what they actually want, that's what they need for their healing. But the state goes on ahead to pursue whatever it wants because it has no built-in accountability to a survivor's needs or healing, and it actually has no interest in a survivor's needs or healing. So the last point on this really big question is that there are actually also a lot of other ways to respond to harm. Some of those ways we know well, some of those ways we're actually still discovering. So these other ways can actually decrease the likelihood of future harm and address the needs of those that are harmed. So these processes can include like transformative justice, community accountability processes. They can include getting folks' basic needs met so that they can live independently of those who cause them harm. It can also include removing an individual's power to do harm. All of these tactics can usually provide a better outcome than a court case or a police investigation, both of which increase the likelihood of additional harm and or possibly even death, particularly for Black folks and other marginalized identities. Folks with other marginalized identities, excuse me. So the biggest take home here that I think is really rooted in what folks are afraid of when they are asking this question, and is that, you know, abolition is a really active and it is not it's a really active process. It's not a permissive thing. It's not a passive thing. I think a lot of people who are unfamiliar with abolition think that it's just a way for people who hurt other people to get away with it and to never face any real consequences. And that is such a real fear. But abolition absolutely involves consequences. It just doesn't involve punishment, and that's the difference. The abolitionist world that we are envisioning is incredibly active and engaged and would require whole communities to show up to address interpersonal harm within our communities. And so there's like a whole social reframe that is required. Okay, next slide. These ones will be a little bit quicker and they have GIFs, so they're more exciting. So the second question, you really want to open up all the jails tomorrow? And the first point that we can offer is that, you know, yes, but abolition is so much more than that. One way to look at it that I would offer is that abolition can be viewed as a destructively creative process. We are taking things apart and we are also creating things. We are deconstructing and we are repairing. We are not interested in throwing away all the structures that we have right now just so we can say we don't have jails. And in fact, that might be a really bad idea because there are so many other social issues, which include like mass misdistribution of resources among our communities and like carceral logics and reliance on punishment. Like we have cops in our heads, you know? And so without doing the larger social work to deconstruct how we approach harm generally as the communities that we are, we might end up just with privatized police forces and, you know, things that look a lot like jails, but they're just called mental health facilities, or, you know, schools that look a lot like jails, which we kind of have now, with even less community oversight than we have now. So to go back to the quote, the Fred Moten and Stefano Harney quote, what I mean by abolition is so much more than that is that we are building a world where prisons and police are not necessary. So once we are both trying to close the jails as soon as possible, and we are also trying to build out all of the tools that we need to not rely on prisons and police as quickly as we can. And so that is, you know, it doesn't have to be, we're not talking about anarchy tomorrow. We're not talking about like this. I mean, some people are, there are people who want anarchy. And if that's you, that's great. You know, I support you. But for the folks who are like really worried about, oh, we're just like want to throw open the jail doors and that's all we're interested in doing, that's not it. I have, great. And then, so this last piece, this last question, I just want to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Is what do we do with the people who don't want to be a part of the process? And this is a question that folks who are even sort of like well into the world of abolition, who are in struggle with trying to do this, ask. It's something that I think twice about sometimes, because it is a scary thing. Like, what do we do with the people who do harm, but are just like, nah, I'm not really trying to be accountable. I don't want to be a part of a process. I don't ever want to see you again, whatever. But the really helpful answer is that community accountability is just one way to address harm in our communities or to respond to it. Janos was discussing earlier that a lot of us have heard about transformative justice or restorative justice as a way to address harm that arises in our human relationships. And those can be really powerful, but it's just one tactic. You know, you don't ever roll into battle. You don't ever roll into really anything you do. It's just one tactic. You have a lot of tools in your toolkit, right? And so preventing future harm and providing well-being for those who have been harmed can include ensuring that a community knows that a person has caused harm, and, you know, keeping them at the door. You know, you can't come into this party. No, the last time you were in this party, you roofied somebody. So that's a no, that's a no-go. You know, there are, sorry for that example, it's just one that I've seen. So we can also provide mutual aid. We can take care of each other to heal and get what we need in order to stop the cycle of harm that comes from violence, that comes from harmful behavior. Public awareness is a strategy to keep ourselves safe, right? We can support others in knowing about histories of harm in communities. Often we are encouraged to look the other way or to not talk shit about harm that, you know, that people have done, especially in the context of child sexual assault. This is something that, you know, Generation 5 talks about. Like, we're encouraged to be like, oh, well, you know, Uncle so-and-so, he just does weird things, but in fact, he's like harming children in a family, right? But so what we know as abolitionists is that it's really important to inform each other about what's going on and to talk about what's going on so that things don't, so that harms don't get to go underground. Deplatforming, or otherwise taking folks' power to do harm, or to sort of like excuse their harm, is a way that folks have used to help to prevent harm in the future. So when people have used a platform and the power that comes along with it to do harm, then that platform can go away. That's not harmful. As long as that person can still get their basic needs met, and get the space that they need in order to heal, it's okay. You know, I mean, it might feel kind of scary that, you know, you could lose your Instagram following for, you know, harm that you've caused, but like, at the end of the day, if you can still eat, you still can have a house, and you still, you know, have people around you who will support you to be better. I'm not mad about it. And I think a lot of abolitionists aren't. And I don't offer these alternatives to suggest that folks who cause harm shouldn't be held accountable, or to let folks off the hook. I offer these responses as a way to say that the same things that we think prisons and police do, which is keep folks who do harm away from those that they harmed, is something that our communities have the power to do. Even when a person is not willing to be present, we have the power to do that. And we got us, we can have us, if we have the resources that we need and the time that we need, and the space to experiment with responding to harm in ways that don't create further harm. Whew. Okay, thanks, y'all. That was definitely more than 15 minutes, but I think that we can take a couple questions. if folks have really pressing ones. I'm going through the chat. Oh, I'm just seeing a lot of affirmation. I appreciate that too. Okay, I'm not seeing any like big questions. We can also, if folks have questions throughout, or if like questions come up, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll save the chat log, just we won't put it anywhere, but we'll go through and see if there are questions, and maybe we can offer some responses in our, oh, here's one. Is transformative justice different in action to restorative justice? Yes, it is. Janos, do you want to respond to that? I think you talked a little bit about that earlier.
Sure, can you repeat the question one more time?
Oh yeah, is transformative justice different in action to restorative justice?
So yes, it is. One of the central tenets and understandings of transformative justice, as we spoke about it, right? And let me be mindful of the language that I'm using, is transformative justice operates almost exclusively within an abolitionist framework. The point of the transformative justice is by focusing on the harm, it does not rely on the state. So that means police, prisons, criminal, ICE, whatever, whatever harm you think we think we're addressing by utilizing the state, transformative justice does not rely upon that. It hopes and aims to not reinforce or perpetuate that violence and systems of violence. And the point of it is about cultivating healing accountability in a communal sense. So we understand that the violence or the harm that may have existed as a result of community, and it takes a community response to address it, because the behavior is probably something we need to address as a community. In difference from a restorative justice is often seeks to repair, and that's the key word, repair and prevent harm by addressing the specific needs of the individuals involved. So that means that we acknowledge that these harm is done at the individual and community level, and the focus is oftentimes on the accused, the accuser, or the survivors within the communities, not necessarily, and I'm trying to be mindful of my words, and I hope they're making sense for you all. So thank you for struggling, like seeing me struggle through this, but not necessarily upon the harm itself, but a lot more so on the people and interpersonal relationships involved. I want to be mindful as we're saying these things. We're not inherently saying one is better or worse, or one is right or wrong. There's opportunities and moments where it's one of some of these work. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's one. And I think, yeah, to what some folks are saying right here, transformative justice is just a framework, and restorative justice is an approach. Sometimes they can work hand in hand, and restoration can be the objective. Sometimes we seek to transform without restoration. So I hope, again, thank you for struggling with me, but I hope that answers your question and that makes sense.
Thanks, Hannah. I wanted to touch on, there are a lot of questions, so we're definitely not going to get to all of them, but I did want to respond to one question that I saw, which is, how do we respond to survivors who want vengeance? And I think that that's a really powerful and important question, because that's something that comes up a lot. It's something that's come up in my own life. That's something that I've seen other folks that come up for other folks. And the first thing I would say is that first, I don't think that there is like any one answer, because every survivor is different. And that's something that the criminal legal system, as it stands, does not account for. Every criminal legal system response to supporting survivors is imagining like a small femme, like cis white woman who has been harmed. Like that's when I was in law school, like that's what we were taught, is like the person who is harmed. And so anybody who doesn't fit inside of that actually doesn't deserve to be taken care of. So the first answer is like about care, like supporting them. One strategy that the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective has offered, Collective, I can't remember, that JC, that Mia Mingus is Mia Mingus's group out in the Bay Area, is the concept of pods, which is a process that happens actually pre-harm, where folks in community identify like a group of folks who would support them if they needed to be held accountable for harm, and a group of folks that would support them if they experienced harm. And those two groups don't have to necessarily be the same people. I think all of us could probably imagine a friend who'd be like really good for, you know, showing up if we'd been harmed, but who wouldn't necessarily be the greatest person for holding us accountable. And that's okay. But there are so many things that like a pod can provide. Or like a group of people that's committed to supporting a person in their healing that the police aren't interested and cannot provide, and that courts are not interested and cannot provide. And so that can look anything from like taking somebody to the middle of the woods and wrapping up a tree with foam so they can beat the shit out of it, or supporting that person and getting access to mental health stuff. Like survivors' interests are important, are absolutely central to any kind of community accountability process. And Mariam Kaba says, I'm gonna not do the best job of quoting Mariam Kaba because she's one of the most brilliant people. But one of the things that she says that I'm gonna try to paraphrase is that we cannot design systems around what people are feeling at probably one of the worst times of their life. It doesn't, like, that is not how we build a society. That's not how we build a community that is responsive to folks' needs. It is totally, what we would absolutely not do is shame a survivor for wanting vengeance, but there are a lot of ways to respond to that desire for vengeance that can either divert it or, you know, get healing needs met or provide space for it without causing additional harm to other people, including the person who caused harm. And that's not a perfect answer. We can also provide additional resources in the follow-up. So thanks for that, everybody. I think we're gonna go to the next piece.
Yes, Annika, appreciate you. I think we're about to head into a break. And so I just wanted to name, again, grounding us in our community agreement that everything we start, we won't finish. And so I am feverishly trying to keep track of all the comments and questions in the chat. And so as we go into this quick 3-minute break, feel free to continue to like throw questions in there, and we will do our best to keep track of all those questions. And in the follow-up, as Annika mentioned, definitely do our best to make sure folks have some really quality resources to engage around. So thank you all so much.
Black joy rising, rising right in front of me, cause it's black feelings till eternity. My black joy dancing, celebrating life with me. It's black joy magic with the family. My black joy gets me all the family. My black joy gets me all the fun. My black joy gets me all the family. My black joy gets me all with the family. My black joy gets me all the family. My black joy gets me all the family. My black joy gets me all the family. My black joy rising, rising right in front of me, cause it's black feelings till eternity. My black joy dancing, come and celebrate with me. It's black joy magic with the family. Black joy family. Black joy creating. Black joy dancing. My black joy magic, ancestors magic. My black joy magic with the family. Keep holding my hand, my hand, my hand. Keep holding my hand. I gotta birth my dreams and stand. Keep holding my hand, my hand, my hand. Keep holding my hand. I lift my palms towards freedom land. Gonna birth my dreams and stand. Gonna birth my dreams and stand.
Our ancestors have dreamed of this moment. Their voices sing through our rage, our joy, our pain, and our triumph. We were made for this moment. Let our voices, our bodies, and our spirits rise up like a mighty force. And remember that we do this. We do this for Rakia, we do this for Islam, for Mike, for Damo, for Corinne, and for future generations. We have no choice but to fight, but to resist, and dream big. Dream big. The Black radical imagination lives and breathes.
All right, Rachel, I think we can begin to regroup. As we're looking at time, it seems as though we're about to go over, certainly. So if folks consent to staying on, you're more than welcome to, but we just want to be conscious of people's time and the amount of time that they committed to this event. So for the folks that would like to stay on, we're going to be transitioning into our next section. Again, thank you all so much for being here and engaging with us and sharing your insights and questions and your experiences. So we've spent the beginning of this event really laying out and grappling with what abolition is, addressing some frequently asked questions, the big picture, right? But as we begin to explore abolition, it's important to note that abolition is as much a political vision and a political ideal as it is a very personal one. At Semi-Cool, if we could go to the next slide, at Semi-Cool, I don't actually know their real name, but someone from the 8 Can't Wait campaign put it best when they said that abolition is massive in vision and intimate in practice, meaning that if we're going to strive for a world without prisons and without police, that work begins internally in our bodies and in our communities. And that's what we're going to get into today. I find the most helpful way to conceptualize this is in levels. If we could go to the next slide. So the discourse around abolition that we've had here today largely starts at the institutional level, right? In this realm, if you could click on the slide. Yeah, thank you. Largely looks like within this institutional realm, right? We talk about abolishing the institutions that enact violence on us, which look like the campaigns that we see in the district and across the country to defund and eventually abolish the police, as well as campaigns to end prisons like No New Jail CC. You can click on the, yep. But as we work to dismantle these systems on a macro level, that then creates, as we've talked about, a need for reliance on alternative forms of care and harm reduction outside of the systems that we already know, as we discuss the need to imagine alternatives. And this usually happens at the community level. However you define that, this could be your neighborhood, your city, whatever the case may be, this is where we work to create those alternatives. So if you could click, because of the pandemic, one of the ways that we've seen the creation of these alternatives are through mutual aid efforts, right? But historically, there have been communities who have always used mutual aid and other types of collective care outside of the state when they know that they cannot rely on the state to protect them or meet their basic needs. An example of those being sex workers, for example. One layer deeper than that, though, is abolition as personal practice. And at this level is what we mean when we talk about abolition as intimate in practice. It means that as we strive to abolish and create alternatives to these punitive and hierarchical systems that we know, we must also work to abolish the ways in which these systems show up in our relationships with each other, you know? If you could click, this shows up in our friendships, our romantic relationships, how we teach our children about punishment, how we resolve conflict with our friends, our partners, our families, etc. Right? And at a layer even deeper than that is when we examine how these structures show up in our relationships with ourselves. As Annika mentioned before, some refer to this as the cop in your head, right? And what we mean by that is the same ways we know that the police work to enforce the status quo in these violent institutions of white supremacy and cis hetero patriarchy, etc. The cops in our heads condition us to do the same, right? That looks like all of our internalized isms, the internalized racism, the internalized phobias, fat phobia, homophobia, transphobia, etc. But not only that, those are, you know, some people refer to the cops in our heads as the voices that tell us that we aren't good enough, or we're not deserving or worthy of love, etc. So you can certainly think of abolition and this trickle down effect from the institutional level to the micro level of self, where liberation from these institutions will eventually bleed into our personal lives. But I think the reverse is true as well. What each one of us today, literally right now, can do to start working towards an abolitionist future is simply by doing the work at this level internally. And when we commit to doing that, we must embrace the concept of interdependence, which is a key component of abolitionist politic. Interdependence is the recognition that we as humans are all connected. Our fates are deeply, deeply intertwined. And because of that, each one of our individual actions have consequences on the collective, not just the people in our immediate communities and circles, but also the folks we don't see, right? We know because of capitalism, for example, the ways in which we consume things affects people across the globe. But also we are deeply intertwined with the people who came before us, right? Those who have passed on, and we will be interconnected with the people who will come after us. So if we know all of that to be true, we must take responsibility for ourselves and how we respond to the harms that we can cause others, and be conscious of how we ourselves are replicating these systems so that we can end them. And that comes through inner work, and it comes through self-awareness. So in a way, if you could look at the quote on the screen, in doing that work, interdependence requires us to communicate about our capacity to negotiate our boundaries and to care for one another, right? And when we're able to do that, when we're able to care for ourselves, to work to liberate ourselves, we're better able then to show up for and care for community, to trust others, to resolve conflict, to hold accountability processes, and overall just reduce harm. And when we're able to do that, if you could click a couple times. And when we're able to do that, why would we need police, right? Why would we need prisons? We will have created a world in which police and prisons become obsolete because we have the capacity to care for ourselves and for each other. So with all of that being said, we're going to dedicate the next 2 activities to get us to think about what abolition in our personal lives and in our bodies can look like. If you could go to the next slide. Because of time, we're going to take the next 5 minutes or so to reflect on the questions here up on the screen. If folks could take time to write their answers in the chat, alternatively, feel free to keep your answers to yourself if you prefer. But we'd really like you all to take the time to think about these questions. The first is 1, how are we replicating these carceral systems within ourselves and each other, and why? 2, how have you seen replications of these systems show up in your own life? 3, what makes us rely on punishment? for what has kept us from liberating ourselves from carceral logic. Yes, I see Hanos in the chat just named carceral logic. For folks who might want a clearer definition, is how we approach punishment. Okay, I'm seeing some powerful answers roll in. Alexis G responding, saying the police in our minds, the inability to imagine a world without police and prisons. Power dynamics between children and adults are huge. Layla says timeouts and separations from other students in the classroom. The desire to hold myself and others around me to societal norms. Exactly. The white savior complex in nonprofits. Okay, the answers are pouring in. This is beautiful. I love it. Again, want to be cautious of or conscious of people's time, but definitely be sure to, even outside of this space, continue to thinking about these things. And thank you so much for sharing all of your examples. I'm gonna pass it to Naya as we transition to the next section.
Yeah, I was just going to uplift some more of our responses, and they're really beautiful, and encourage y'all to keep reading through, and I'll keep passing to Naomi.
Great. So again, my name's Naomi. I use they, them pronouns. If we could go back to the last slide, that would be great. The one before with the intro. Yeah, so we've been for the past stretch of time very up here in our heads, and we've been thinking really theoretically and processing definitions about how we understand abolition. And the purpose of this next section is to take some of that energy and turn it back in towards the body and towards what Aiden was describing around the role of the self in abolition. And thank you, Jazz B, for the reminder that we have a healing and safety Zoom room that you can go to if you need to take a break at any point in time. So what we're going to do in this section, in which we're using the body as a guide as we articulate our visions for abolition. So we're going to show an image of a body on the screen you may have seen as we're flipping through, read a statement aloud, and then invite you to reflect and feel where that statement lands. So literally, do I feel that in my chest? Do I feel that in my shoulders? Do I feel that in my back? Do I feel that in my neck? Where is this landing in my body? And then you can use the annotation feature on your screen if you're on a phone or on a computer on Zoom to show where on the body it lands. So we can create kind of a live map of how we're holding some of these ideas. And the point of this exercise, again, is to turn our attention towards the body as a guide as we begin to articulate our visions of liberation and abolition. So the body not only holds previous traumas and intergenerational traumas, but also houses our potential for expression and liberation. And so we invite you to continue to return to your body and learn from your body as a check and as sort of a navigational guide as we evaluate our own visions for liberation. So let's go to the first slide. And I did just see a flag about the healing room that may potentially not be secure. So if you want a message, if you need a healing space and we can't confirm that the healing room is secure and a bunch of folks are joining, perhaps you can message Allison directly in this chat. That's Allison Young, Healing and Safety. And I'm sorry about that. Zoom is complicated. And yeah, we never know what exactly is going to happen when we open ourselves up online. So this first one, a world without prisons is possible. So let's take a second and think, like, where does that hit? I think for me, that hits like at the front of my chest where I feel like the future is and where possibility is. And I don't know if we have the annotations option up here, but I see folks using the chat, and I think that's amazing. I see a lot of throat, my heart, chest, solar plexus, throat, my diaphragm, my chest, my stomach, my head. Thanks, y'all. Oh, these are beautiful. Okay, and so our next statement that we're going to read, if we could clear the annotations, perhaps, is those who commit harm should be punished. What does that feel like? For me, I would say that that's like the gut. Yeah, that's low in the body. I see head, I see stomach, my jaw, and my gut. Stomach, sternum, legs, back of my head, tight shoulders, pelvic floor. Thank you. We're gonna, I think, move on to the next one. Thank you, Katie. Maybe just one more to the next one. Sweet.
Sorry, just having a hard time.
No worries. Take your time. We're all in this together.
Maybe now. Yes.
Yes, we love it. Okay, so this next one is, and this is not an abolitionist idea, but it's the idea that there are good people and bad people. And once you become bad, you're bad forever. For me, I would say that is in my shoulders as well. My jaw is clenched. I see my jaw right in the gut. I see throat constricted, my neck, my chest, back of my neck, tight chest and shoulders. That makes my heart hurt. Throat got tight. So I think we offer this, right, to think about what is the world, what is the vision, the current vision of the world offering us, and what can we learn from our bodies, so that we're not getting these feelings in an abolitionist future. And I think we have one more that we can turn to. Thank you, Katie. So we've got actually two more. Just kidding. Strong communities can respond to interpersonal violence without state intervention. Where are we at on that one? I see shoulders, my face, and my throat. Shoulder tension lightens. Cerebral rush, my lungs, my hands, feet on the ground. Not sure, and that's okay. Forehead, arms, temples, jaw loosens. I love this. Okay, let's do the next last one. Our final question, which I think can be a guide that we can hopefully continue to hold and reflect on as we continue to articulate these visions in sort of an iterative process, is imagine a moment when you felt safe. What made you feel safe in that moment? And where in your body did you feel that safety? I think for me, that's grounded in the legs. That's like centering in the stomach. I see thighs, chest and lungs, warmth all over. Yes. Fetal position. I feel safe in my chest. Fullness in my chest, all over relaxation, connection to the ground and the seat below me, my heart, relaxed neck and back of head, my hands, shoulders drop, right? So this is the feeling that we want to guide us. Like what kinds of changes, what kinds of communities, what kinds of visions are going to bring these feelings forward and bring these feelings to the fore. And I think building this practice of checking in with ourselves is a great way to have to have a depth of knowledge about what the world to come should feel like. Yeah, so exactly. When the state offers, like, as Naya mentioned before, body cameras instead of defunding the police, how do you receive that offer in your body? Does it feel like what safety feels like? Probably not. So when we know ourselves and can imagine liberation and safety in our bodies, we can call bullshit on fake and insufficient proposals made by the state and generate our own visions instead. And that's what this exercise is designed to build the capacity for within each of us. And thank you for participating so fully. That was really, really awesome. And I wasn't sure how that was going to go. So thanks, y'all. We're going to move on to the next section, which was formerly going to be breakouts, but because we had so much depth and so much brilliance shared with us earlier, we went a little bit over time and is now going to be reflection questions that we offer to you as takeaways as you continue to move this work forward in your life. So we're going to go to the next slide. So I'm gonna frame these questions and then we're gonna move past them. And I'm gonna again invite you all to take them with you as you continue to move this work forward in your life. So what we've been doing today is, right, we got our theoretical definitions, we got a lot of really brilliant knowledge, and then we got some great analysis around how to think structurally about abolition, and then we also built in some practice around how we hold abolitionist ideas in our bodies. So I imagine what some of y'all might need in this time is a chance to practice how to talk about abolition. And so the invitation is to take or identify one of the abolition FAQ that either we discussed here today or you've heard or you've asked, and take some of the information that was shared here, some of the embodiment practices that were shared here, some of the structural analysis that was shared here, and practice how you would respond in a real life setting. And so we're not going to take the time to do that right now because we respect your time and we know you have other things to do today, but are hoping that as you move this work forward, you can get with some friends and get with community and take time to practice how to speak about abolition, because that's one of the key ways that we get to move abolition forward. Sweet. So yeah, let's go on to the next one, which I think is we're on to our closing now, because we're also not doing a poll.
Yeah, we'll send a follow-up email that will have lots of things, including ways to stay connected and share what we're thinking about with each other. So yeah, we can go to the full closing.
Next slide. Yeah, so what we ask for is a commitment. And that commitment will entail with choose a buddy or a community, a group, and make commitments to support one another in your abolitionist work in your area within the next 3 months. So whatever that looks like, to whatever capacity and the willingness that you have to consent to that work, make a commitment to collaboratively imagine the future that we will, again, collaboratively work towards. And check in with one another every couple of weeks to see how it's going. To some of the questions that were being asked and posed, and to really difficult ones that require us to reflect and struggle through, the crux of it is really that we need to struggle through that together as a community. And it's with one another that we can find the answers, that what works for us in our communities and in our neighborhoods and for ourselves. And so I think as we walk through some of those, if we can start making those commitments, not just to have abolition as a politic, but as a practice, then we can collaboratively in community create the collective vision that we know we will achieve. Next slide. And so a few of the folks still working on some efforts here in DC are No New Jails DC, Decrim Now DC, which is pushing to decriminalize sex work, Defund MPD, which is pushing to defund the Metropolitan Police Department, and the organization that we're with, which is BYP 100. Current movements can also be followed on Facebook, I believe. And Katie, feel free to come in if there's other social media by which folks can support. And we again encourage you all to check out defundmpd.org, where there's resources available to engage here in the DC area. And then at the core, for us to achieve the future that we hope to achieve, the one that we know we will achieve, it's going to take all of us doing that in community with one another, struggling to find the answers that best make sense for us. It's through that we will achieve the promised imagined future that we have for ourselves.
Yeah, I put current movement social media stuff in the chat. So yeah, please follow us and stay engaged with the abolition movement that's happening here locally, but all the other movements that are happening in the DMV and around the country.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for joining us. I think that's our last bit. Feel free to take this conversation to yourselves, to your communities, to social media, wherever you feel you have that, because it's together that we're going to achieve our promised future. Imagination can't exist in a vacuum. It's got to be done in collaboration and with community. And through that, we can achieve something that makes all of us feel safe and cared for. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all. And also, feel free to leave. We're done. The people who were connecting in the chat, we're not going to cut you off. Make sure you get that connection in the direct message. So we'll leave the room open for like 2 minutes because these connections need to happen. I love it, the energy.
Maybe we can throw on a little celebratory, Black Joy experience.
Yes.
So, so it's kind of like a party. Everybody's connecting at a party. It's just
and donate to BYP. I don't know if one of y'all want to throw the links in or personal Venmos, because folks have been putting in a lot of energy and time and labor into this beautiful presentation. So yeah, congrats and great job, everyone.
And support Katie as well. Absolutely. Yes. We support Black people. Yeah.
As you leave, one of the things we'll do, because I think there's a lot that's happening right now, we're going to make sure that we're going to email you the information. So the resources that we shared, the slides that we presented, if we can, the chat transcript. Obviously, we're going to try to vet through and make sure we remove any personal information that folks may have had in private messages. But our objective is to be as transparent. Abolition also is in our practice with one another. There's no hierarchy or gatekeeping. Our information is your information because you're our community. So thank you so much for joining us again.
BYP 100 cultural workers understand that energy can neither be created or destroyed, only transferred to create movement. We seek to transform the energy in collective spaces and have that sacred space be consumed by freedom dream. Holistic energy is what fuels the creation of new forms of cultural production. Holistic energy is the intersection of artistic expression, healing, and anti-oppression work. Holistic energy allows us to tap into experiences that bring joy to Black life. And through this energy, we are fully able to bring our entire selves to the work and invest in our collective solidarity through transformative relationships and radical love. well. As the man is still, my voice a tool for the most high as well. Hard to swallow a pill that brings truth to the mass appeal. I know I'm going into overkill, but keep flowing. When you get to the top, you keep going. I'm using not in the box, it's full motion. Competition falling back, dominoes. Arm busy, play it back. Fantasy as well. As the man is still, my voice a tool for the most high as well. Hard to swallow a pill that brings truth to the mass appeal. I know I'm going into overkill, but keep flowing. When you get to the top, you keep going. I'm using not in the box, it's full motion. Competition falling back, dominoes. Arm busy, play it back. Memento, bash and drums. Bump like my heartbeat, pump, spit venom to the track is numb. But I ain't number one, but infinitely on the one with all the strength. Never need the gun as I proceed to hum. Beatbox with a finger snap. Adrenaline rush puts me in combat. Move with the media in the bull crap. Ask me to politics, fuck that. The suckers got it coming to them in a storm. What if people begging to stop it with no home? Women and children are being killed by drones.
Yeah.
They got phones, making you examples. Radio sound opposite of Joe Sample. Mother Earth trample, crying to her children. Still mentally enslaved by the pilgrims. That's why I slay mice with freedom rights. Scribble writs on the page as it ignites.